Awesome. Thank you so much, Dee, and welcome everybody. So it's been 3 weeks since we last met. I'm still getting the hang of where we're going to store our notes, which I think is going to be in GitHub. But Dee's been kind enough to post the recording from our last meeting. And I thought I would go over our agenda for today, and I'll read everything out for the benefit of folks who might not be eyes on the screen right now. I figure we could go through any additional introductions of people who are not at the last meeting. Charlie Frick at Johns Hopkins is kind enough to give a little overview of some projects that you already have underway. And I figure we can make some progress on trying to do a brainstorm about the definition and goal of this working group before figuring out a time to set our next meeting, hopefully with more folks. And maybe Monday's a bad day, maybe it's August and vacations, who knows? But I wanted to open it up to anybody who wasn't here our last session.
Sorry, introductions. My name is Rob Malnati. I'm with ThatDot. We're a relatively new young company with some technology in the IOB space. So thanks for the content. We find this really, really compelling and interesting in our work.
Great. Thank you so much. And again, anybody, please feel free to unmute. But that might be everybody. So welcome, and maybe we can, just since we have the space and such a small group, maybe we could just do a round robin of brief introductions, and I'll go first. So Lodrina Cherney, I'm at Cyber Reason, and happy to be here with you all. And I'll just let folks popcorn in and unmute as they would like.
Okay, I'll jump in. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Charlie Frick. I'm a cybersecurity researcher at Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab. I'll be sharing a couple pictures with you and just having a brief discussion on some of our research. Pretty high level today, but we are working with CISA on some research on machine readable and shareable ways to describe attack behavior. And so wanted to help kind of level set what inspired our work and where we're looking to go. And just hoping that this group, I think there's a great opportunity here for us to really formalize how we do this. Thanks, over.
My name is Paula Lewandowski. I work at APL and I work with Charlie.
My name is Daryl Diebold. You can't see me because I'm driving, and I work for IBM. I'm a executive security advisor. Was on the global team. Decided to downsize to, I guess you want to call it downsizing in North America. Work with federal clients, public sector mostly now, but have worked across a lot of industries. And I'm grateful to be here with you guys.
Hi, I'm Maggie McAlpine. I work at Cyber Reason with Lodrina, and I'm looking forward to hearing this discussion.
Hey, I'm Dee Sher with Oasis. I'm one of 2 staff people that support the OCA. I'm involved in the marketing and outreach for the OCA.
And I'm Claudia. I'm Dee's colleague. I'm the Open Project Program Manager with Oasis, and helping our projects to do their work.
That might be everyone, or maybe Russ is on the line as well. But if we don't have anybody else, I will say thank you all for being here. I'm going to stop my share. And Charlie, I'm going to turn screen share over to you.
Okay.
I'm happy to hear from you next.
All righty. So just to level set everyone, my name again, Charlie Frick from Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. And we're currently supporting Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, CISA, on some tasks for machine speed and machine readable cyber information sharing. And one of those things that we've been researching are what we've been calling behavior objects. And I wanted to apologize, this is going to be a very rough discussion this morning. I don't have anything terribly formal ready that can be publicly released for our draft objects work, but I wanted to share with you a couple pictures of what led us to start here and help set the stage of where we're currently going with our research and things that we hope that we might be able to get a better grip on by participating in the working group to kind of capture industry's thought. At its heart, one of the major challenges we've seen is there's a lot of standards out there. When it comes to encapsulating cyber threat information, what we found is so far STIX seems to be the best thing that we have right now. And there's a big challenge when you start thinking about STIX in terms of network defense, and especially when you think about it in terms of automated network defense, of what we might want a computer to do once it is receiving this information without someone having to go look up a blog and pick up all the context. So if you will, I'm going to share my screen and describe a couple pictures to you. So this is going to be, let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. All right. Now this is, I was doing some research with a nifty little tool called Elemendar. Some of you might be familiar with it, some might not. But Elemendar is basically an AI-based solution that you can feed it a threat report and it will generate a STIX2 bundle based off that report. And it does it very rapidly. So this is for, some of you might be familiar with an event called Reaper from a little while back. Involved some attacks out in Asia. But the main thing I wanted to get at was, I'm using the Oasis STIX visualizer in this picture. I fed that, if I really want to think about what's going to be shared machine to machine, I want to put on my network defense hat. I wanted to look at the type of information that STIX bundles are currently sending. And what you'll see here is, this is, like I said, for the Reaper case, things are really centered to a report object that'll branch off. We'll have a cluster of identities. Some of these are victims, some of these are attackers. That still needs a little bit more clarity. We also have a few different tools that have been utilized in the attack. What's supposed to be a set of threat actors, but really comes down into different kind of malware campaigns in this view. A chunk of malware samples with data that get mapped out to a big set of vulnerabilities. And we get a set of MITRE attack entries for the attack patterns that then get linked to some of the indicators as well. Now, when I look at these type of relationships, I really kind of suffer, because if I want to think about a network defender, what does this data really enable? And what I've really got is patch the CVEs, block the IOCs, and see if I can find some malware signatures. Because then I could read through all of these MITRE attack patterns and attempt to counter them. But if I'm really dealing with a machine, the only thing that machine can look up is kind of the generic description of how to counter a MITRE attack pattern. I know I am familiar with the defend matrix that was currently made, but I would counter that right now. That's not the most useful thing to deploy in network defense automatically, because it's a little too broad in scope. If I look at something like PowerShell, one of these elements is use of PowerShell maps back to look for PowerShell in your organization. That's not really quite enough to go detect something, especially when we start thinking about false positives. In an organization where PowerShell is never used, certainly. But any place that's got tools that are using PowerShell, admins, developers, I can't really just do a Splunk query on sysmon logs looking for PowerShell execution. I'm going to get several thousand false positives to sort through. It's not really helping me. And when it comes to just patching the CVEs and blocking the IOCs, this is all very reactionary. I think, I'm preaching to the choir given the purpose of this group, but this quite isn't what we need. And so then to kind of look for a slightly different model. Here's the same case, and I'll blow it up some, but forgive me, it's a little ugly today. This is a Unit 42 adversary playbook, okay? And for the same Reaper case. So this is another view of sticks, and I'd say this is probably some of the best sticks objects I've seen right now. But we still run into this problem where here we'll have a series of reports. You can still get identities out here and see some campaigns, a little bit of malware focus here. But once again, you're still getting back to, I get a block of MITRE attack options that map to a bunch of indicators. And I really applaud them for adding, these green circles are your courses of action. And I applaud them for writing up how to react to the individual MITRE attack elements. But again, if you go into the detail of those options, it still requires a lot of familiarity with the threat intel and the context that one would get from a series of blogs and written reports to really understand how to follow that guidance. And if we want to share this to automation, because we're thinking of organizations that don't have network defenders that are highly well-versed in adversary tactics, techniques, and procedures, those individual green blobs right now still don't really allow you to address the threat. So that's where we came up with what we were really looking at is each of those, the MITRE attack is fantastic matrix of tactics and techniques, but we need to respond to procedures and not just one-offs, because that's what I was just trying to say with that kind of detailed PowerShell example I was just mentioning. We can't really look at this one piece at a time. And also from a network defender case, I'm less interested in describing the behavior of each individual threat actor out on planet Earth. I want the behavior in my networks that can be observed that abstracts out to sequences of these tactics and techniques. And so what we've been working with is an expansion on STIX 2.1 for behavior objects that are subsets out of an attack category. But the real power there is those individual behaviors, they occur in a sequence. And we're looking at how to encapsulate the sequence of those behaviors because we believe that they repeat across multiple campaigns. And that sequence can be tied to a detection object that helps automation or a less mature organization that doesn't have big threat intel, allows them to know what sequence to run these detection queries on to find that type of activity. It might not be just find PowerShell. It's probably find things above find machines that received an attachment, or I'm kind of making this on the fly, but received an attachment that also executed PowerShell, that also then can go back and grab a deeper level of logs to see, did that machine have additional odd network heuristics firing off from some of our IDSs, and maybe then even dive deeper to pull things like sysmon from a machine like that and see, is there something going on with the processes there that's a little wonky? Like, did SVC host start, did SVC host start making UDP connections across the internet, which would be a little weird. But the problem is, most is trying to understand, how do we define that sequence to help us search and help guide people to what type of response actions should happen when they observe certain patterns. Because I would love to just, be able to gobble up sysmon from every machine in a large enterprise. And some people are funded enough to be able to handle that type of logging. Most that I've experienced can't begin to handle that level of ingest. So that's why we need to be able to have a detection that helps say, search for these elements, then grab this lower level of data from the return of that, run it against this analytic, then we think you have a problem. If we think you have a problem, here is the set of things to do across the network, across the endpoints, to really get towards where we could share a response workflow. And that ties into other work that we've been doing under our previous research called IACD, where we were looking at how to share response workflows. And we've been sharing some of those insights with the Cacao group as well, as we're looking at how to pass around response objects. I really go ahead, please.
Yeah, Charlie, this is Daryl. I had a quick question.
Yeah.
Is your source data flow traffic? What layer is it, I guess? Initial source data.
So initial source data for the threat intel?
No, for the actual traffic that you're monitoring, not the threat intel that you're using to reference it again.
So that's what I was trying to get across is we're looking across multiple use cases. So primarily it would, this type of source data that we're dealing with in our research are endpoint, are logs, NetFlow, and things like IDS alerts for the most part. So we have EDR logs, we have sysmon on the boxes in our research environment, we have NetFlow coming in, we also have some Zeek sensors.
Right, sensor data.
Yeah, and so we're looking at combining that level of information so that when we receive a behavior, we can search across the right combination and help do those translations. I'm sorry I cut you off, Daryl.
No, you're fine. You were explaining. I appreciate that. I was cutting you off, and I apologize. So the flow traffic, are you actually doing, converting the flow traffic into logs, the NetFlow data?
We are. That's what we're doing. Yes.
Okay. If there were a way to get native NetFlow traffic and do the analysis, would that be more meaningful if you could do it without the noise?
Absolutely. Like I said, a big part of what we're doing is looking at how to just encapsulate the sequence of behaviors to look for and tie them to a detection and response object. We wanted to kind of build the prototype container, the types of execution and tools. Really want to be able to share that amongst a community like this, because I'm positive that folks that aren't at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab are going to have a much more robust set of solutions for those capabilities.
Right. And I'm not plugging, I mean, we have the capability that does it natively in a platform, but we have not done a good job of explaining that to the market.
Yeah, and so like I said, a lot of what I'm doing is looking at how we, how can we, whether that's, and I'm not proposing a solution to this working group on our initial meeting. The early work I'm doing right now we're building custom STIX 2.1 objects to hold the data that we're talking about, so we can show a better example. Hopefully, maybe in the next working group meeting, maybe in one more, once we've gotten enough put together that we can show more detail externally, we can show more examples and refine our approach, because I think OASIS is the right place to push that, so that we could, and if folks think that STIX is the wrong answer, I'm open to hearing other things on the table. It's just the most standardized machine shareable format I think we've got. And I don't, if anybody's from Circle on the line, I mean, no disrespect to MISP or any other solution. It's just, that's
I agree
what I've
with
been dealing with. Yeah.
I agree with you completely. In terms of having some, there are just too many standards out there. They're really not outcome focused. That they're really focused from a compliance or audit standpoint
Yes.
on risk, and not really focused on the threat detection side, which is further down. Like and I just have a suggestion for the group. Even there's some interesting things on sociopaleontological and archaeological studying in terms of principles they use, because they're much more mature as a discipline in terms of how they detect behavior, like how they pattern behavior and what they look for in early capture, and then also, ironically, in preservation of animal sciences, like reserves and how they identify, and that's actually more practical in terms of present indicators that they look for. And both of those areas, as far as disciplines, are way more mature than we are in terms of the principles they apply, because they've gone through much more trial and error, just time, right? And it might be useful for our group for someone to dig into those. I've dug into slightly the surface.
So I'd like to make a quick statement. This is Kim Watson, and I've been working with Charlie. Part of why he was looking at what he was doing is we were trying to understand the difference in what an indicator of behavior looks like from a threat behavior understanding and from a net defense understanding. What we found with IOCs is there's a very big difference in not just the attributes you care about, but certain characteristics of the data itself. So that was why we were kind of looking on this, because there's a difference between what an adversary's doing, their behavior, which is where a lot of the threat seems to be threat analysis, and a lot of even the stick stuff is sort of focused on, and how that affects the assets on the network, how that makes those assets behave, and how you would detect that. So I don't disagree with you, Daryl, but I also want to be careful that we're thinking about this from the usage of the object versus the threat object. I didn't say that right, but the idea is that I think how you would describe a threat object or a behavior of an adversary is very different than how you would describe the behavior of the assets they compromise or target. And I think you would find that you describe that behavior even differently if you're looking to detect it. So you want to mitigate it from what's happening to it. You want to detect it by how it's behaving. And both of those you want to tie back to these repetitive sort of procedures on the adversary's side. So I wanted to throw into the group here that part of why we were looking the way Charlie did, and we looked at these big things, was sort of from a network defense standpoint, how would you describe behaviors? And I'm just throwing that out there, but I just wanted to raise that point. But I do agree with you, Daryl, that looking at ways to classify the behavior that it makes it easy to relate to other points, or makes it simpler to organize so that you're not constantly in a many-to-many scenario would be helpful. And I'll shut up now.
No, that's an excellent point. And I had suggested this about 10 years ago to one of our distinguished engineers on the automotive side that works largely with large automotives around, but I was focused on I guess it doesn't matter, a Wi-Fi transmission and using vehicles as jump points. That stuff doesn't matter. But my suggestion to him was in business models from a process engineering standpoint, because I have a background in that with Gartner and other stuff as well, and Oracle and HP and SAP. And the systems you're protecting, most cybersecurity professionals have no idea how business process on the practical side, the human level, relates back to system side and software, right? And so because we oftentimes can't understand the source of the problem, we're always dealing with symptoms, to the point you're making. And what we're doing, it aggravates us as professionals, because we're already hindered by so many limitations. The advent of our profession as a discipline, the limitation of money. The biggest one being, above all of those, is human behavior, because we've been driving this on the business side for models and consumption of technology without really adhering to measuring risk in the utilization of those technologies in the same way we do business risk from a financial model standpoint, right? As an example. And it would help us to go back as a discipline to go back and look at fundamentally how are businesses aggravating the risk, right? And then identify what do we have available sensor data sources that can give us an idea of normal traffic. And my suggestion 10 years ago to distinguished engineer was, why aren't we developing passive nodes, virtual or otherwise, that can be placed in line and network, east, west, north, south, that can pattern normal behavior. And as natively using whatever protocols that are native in the traffic that's normal, capturing that, because to give you guys an idea, on the OPM side, the operational process management side, there's tons of tools that are used in the middleware space to coordinate between non-normal speaking technologies to then allow businesses to function normally, right? Utilizing disparate technologies, right? And security could benefit immensely from someone developing a passive node sensor that could capture the traffic and then to the point of object, develop behavioral models on what is normalized traffic. And humans that are process engineers, which there are already dozens, if not hundreds, in large businesses and institutions that are doing all of the things on the software side, that could then, it wouldn't be ice skating uphill, so to speak, to accomplish it, to get a normal pattern. And then that would then really speak volumes to what we're trying to do here in terms of identifying threat or anomalous activity. And whether it's latent process activity or it's an actual threat qualifying.
Daryl, that's really interesting. And I wanted to ask Charlie and Kim, kind of thinking about the future ideal scenario. I understand this is all under development, and even in a month from now, you'll have more to share. But I'm wondering, in your perfect world, let's say something like a year from now or 3 years from now, what would be your ideal vision for where this ends up with CISA, to understand basically your perfect scenario of where this is going?
So this being the IOB kind of work, or, we just sort of opened an aperture much bigger than just the idea of this working group. So I'm just asking you.
Yes. So
Okay.
I'd say
Okay.
beyond the working group, independent of us being in this session together, if you were continuing
Okay.
with CISA.
So my perfect world is pretty simple. I want to find a way to be describing something that can be done in a machine readable way, that can be shared, that supports industry basically being able to build detections and mitigations on behalf of small organizations, right? So what I want is that all of this threat work that's happening in these independent pipelines actually gets shared in a way that there's the connective tissue to figure out what's happening. And then when a detection fires, IOCs from that can be pulled back in, or information from it can be pulled back in, and more people look at it. And there's this sort of, what ends up happening is, in the pictures Charlie showed you earlier, when people talk about threat, it's all about the adversary's behavior, and figuring out what to do with that is almost impossible, even when you know exactly what happened. So our goal would be to figure out the right way to think about using this and understanding these behavior sets, where detections are less likely to have false positives because there's sets of things happening along similar dimensions, right? It happens to the same asset, it's using the same credential, it's happening in the same time window. And figuring out how to represent that in an automated, machine readable, consistent fashion that allows all of the data that's out there about threat, that's already sort of interrelated and inferred, to be able to be mapped to detections and mitigations that can be done on behalf of people, right? So right now the two worlds are disjoint, and if we could do nothing else in the next whatever, but figure out the point of consistency, the usage of the standard, and what's required from a consistency standpoint, from either existence, usage, or meaning, And all three have to be consistent. And right now that's not true for most Stix implementations. But if we could make that happen around some of these, then you could auto-populate all of this threat information in essence with the stuff necessary for people who build signatures to build signatures, for people who build more complex detection capabilities across their stack to build those, and for mitigations that could actually take place at the set level. Those vendors would know when they detect it, you could agree to it, and they could actually take those actions, and we could actually offload a fair amount of this from the SOC and from the end organization who doesn't have the resources. So the work is trying to figure out what's the right stuff to
Kim, you cut out there.
quote standardize on.
Okay.
What's critical and how do you bring it together? The fertigation can all happen in sort of a big pot of people working together, right? Right now, the standard works really well from me sharing to you because we have a definition we use. And I can do that in an automated way. So we've got to get it from out of sharing and into usage. That would be the dream scenario. Does that answer your question? Without all the breaks that probably happened, because I heard Charlie say that I left for a stretch.
We got it. Yeah, just I think minus a few words at the end. I love hearing that, Kim, and I love your vision.
Hey, this is
Thank
Margaret Cunningham from Force Point. I'm a psychologist, so I spend time trying to figure out what everybody's talking about because I don't always speak the same language. So, Kim, what I'm hearing you say, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that we have to find a way to connect using a common language or a common framework, the behavior of threat actors with the behavior of the compromised stuff that we've got going on, whether it's, you know, a device or a process. And by uniting that external threat actor behavior with the internal behavior of the things that are compromised, we can then better communicate out the types of actions that would need to be taken with reduced false positives and a way to kind of enable or scale the responses on the backs of larger organizations to benefit smaller places that can't necessarily take it on themselves.
Yes, the only thing I would change about that is that I don't know if it's connecting it to the actions of the compromised assets or if it's connecting it to how, so this is probably, it may be more looking at the behaviors of those things, or it may be looking at how to detect the behaviors of those things. And the reason I say I don't know, because one is about transitions and one is about state. And mitigations are mostly to prevent transitions. They're meant to stop unauthorized access or an elevation in privilege or being able to take an action. State is about actions you can do at that state. And while there are some mitigations there aren't many, but that's where detections often are. Although some detections in logs are about transitions attempted, passed, or failed. So what I will say to you is, yes, what you said is exactly true, except I don't know the answer yet. And that's part of what Charlie's been looking at, is we're trying to figure out what's the thing that you have to map it to, in essence, so that it maps naturally to the scaling of detection and mitigation, because I don't know the answer to that yet. So that's,
yeah, I was really making sure I was understanding.
Yeah, no, you had the concept exactly.
Yeah, and you know, I'm also really I'm interested in how we could do a better job of showing what some of those behavioral sequencing things are. I think that when we try to share this information, it's difficult to explain in a way that's simple, and then nothing gets done because of the complexity. So I don't know.
I think you did right.
Yeah, I'm sitting here like, yeah. So, you know, I think that one of the things that I think about in this working group is how can we reach more people by explaining what we're trying to do more effectively, while also providing that depth of knowledge or the depth of capability based on some of the stuff that is really complex. And again, I don't have the answer for that, but I think a lot of people on this call can go really deep dive on the technical, but it's hard to translate that out. And I think that should be actually one of our goals, to make sure that we do a good job on that with whatever we come up with.
There's this is Daryl. I mean, separate from the IOB, if you wanted to get together, I can share some sort of map modeling that I do. Non-technical, it's really whiteboarding, more historical analysis of how we got here. I present it to executives, lay executives that are, I say lay meaning non-cybersecurity professionals that are need a point of reference, a jumping point that then builds a story in their own mind relevant to what they do on a daily basis. And that's, you know, I've done that for years for IBM and for Gartner. So if you wanted to get offline, if you wanted to set up time, I'd love to share that with you.
Yeah, I would love that. And I would love to make sure that that type of connection is made, to really flesh out all of the concepts that you're able to share upwards to people who might not know about it, but really create that content or the real work behind it.
Yeah, they don't have a place to put the risk. You're talking like you're exactly like you're saying. I'm glad you're in this discussion, because executives don't have, if they did, they would throw all their money at it, but then the businesses would go under, right? And so they really don't have a kind of reference for where this risk is and what's acceptable, what's not. That's why we're sort of here, so to speak, as an industry. Or did I shut the whole conversation down with that comment?
You've made us speechless. It's actually Charlie and Kim that have made me speechless. I've been thinking here and taking some notes, and I'm so glad we're recording this, because I think there's so much here to chew on. But yeah, I greatly appreciate the presentation, and I think we're kind of getting towards the next topic that I want us to think about, which is why we're here. But I wanted to leave the floor open for any more comments on this topic specific to the Johns Hopkins work. Chris. All right, well, we'll go on to our next topic. And again, a big thank you to Charlie for presenting, and Kim for sharing your work here. I did start to take some notes as everybody was discussing during the last section. I wrote down some things that I heard both about what we'd like to get done in this group and why we're here and why this topic is so important. So I'm going to share with credit to Kim for the top note that I have here, and also for Margaret, a couple of things I heard, and I hope to pivot the discussion to why we're here and the importance of defining what we're doing in this group. And we talked about some of this in our kickoff session, but some of the things I heard just now are describing information that's usable for our defenders. That's both usable and my inference would be actionable, because especially as Charlie showed, when we have just one threat actor or one type of incident, how complex that mapping can get, and how it's really not feasible to keep working with threat intel the way we've been working, especially when you consider how many different companies are using threat intel and spinning it in their own specific ways. And please jump in if I've heard this incorrectly. I heard the goal to reach people about what we're doing effectively here and finding a way to translate our technical projects into something that is useful for more people across the board. So I was hoping either asynchronously, let me find my Zoom chat window and I'll throw in this link. I'm happy to have folks jump into this Google document. It should be editable once you click on the link that I've shared in Zoom. And for anybody watching the recording, I'll share this out over the list and Slack later as well. I'm hoping to have folks either just add to this list or feel free to unmute and discuss. And I'm happy to capture some of the reasons why we're here and what we want to get out of this. I think I'll start by saying one of the reasons I am is that much like some of the things that Kim shared earlier, I think it is untenable for current analysts, current defenders to be looking at the amount of information out there, and with increased threat actors, just understanding how they can apply that information when increasing threats are coming out. And basically the way that we've been doing this in the past with indicators of compromise doesn't capture the whole picture. So for me, I'm going to say actionable ways to share actionable intelligence at scale. Going beyond IOCs.
I think to your point on the word actionable, we can share forever, even if we perfect the language or communication strategy, but there has to be like a toolkit or something such that if there is intelligence, people know what to do with it and what the resources are that are required to act on it. I think one of the reasons people don't act is because they don't know what resources they need or what to do. And they can't identify that they don't have the resources quickly to get help.
Thanks, Margaret. Can I say understanding resources that are relevant and actionable?
Like required to respond or something, I don't know.
I just want to add a thought, and it wouldn't go to your list, but it has to do with actionable. To make something usable, we found that there are two things that really matter. It has to be consumable and it has to be actionable. So you have to have a way to bring it natively into the processes where you expect to use it. And actionable means it has to be able to support the decisions being made in those processes. So understanding that even actionable intelligence, if it doesn't get where it needs to go in the time frame where taking action matters, you still lose it. So I don't expect to change any of your words. I'm just like sort of throwing out to the group here that there's sort of two halves to that coin, and it's consumable and actionable. Actionable's fine as the word to keep, but in the back of our minds, it matters that it gets to the people, you know, that it's consumable by the people who are going to be taking the action. So if that's the vendors, that means they have to be part of being able to share the information. And so the standard we pick and stuff like that may matter. It's tedium, but I just wanted people to have it in the back of their mind that it matters that it is both consumable and actionable. That's all.
Kim, and that's like the timeliness factor in my head.
Well,
like, yeah, like the consumable plus on time to the right place to, you know.
I actually think those were the three things we defined as usable in a paper we wrote, but it was, nice. I think, timely, consumable, and actionable. But yes, it's just the idea is sharing means I'm getting it from A to B. Using implies that it's getting to B in the form in which B needs it to use it. And that's the little extension that tends to be missing. That's all I wanted to sort of put in there. And then actionable means you can do something with it, right? And different data is actionable to different groups. right? And so we always have to think of who's the end consumer. And when we're scaling, sometimes it's the end org and sometimes it's their security vendors. It's just one of those things you have to sort of pay attention to when you're thinking about what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve. Sorry,
Yeah, happy to capture that. Thank you. And also, as I mentioned, if anybody wants to start typing in here, please feel free if that's the way that best helps you organize your thoughts or get them out. As that last discussion was going back and forth, I thought of one thing which maybe is obvious to everybody here, but I hope based on where we're having the conversation that we're also talking about having an open and extensible framework and build an open and extensible model. So I'm going to add that to the list here. And again, none of this as it goes in ends up being written in stone, but just seeing where we are all looking to contribute and get out of this.
So this is Russ. I'll add something to this list. I think that I'm always interested in with the OCA context of information, because I'm not sure exactly, and I haven't read the paper that you guys are talking about yet. But when we say information, I'd really like to know what we're talking about here in terms of what we're sharing, what we're needed to share, and then figure out where we can add context to help supplement that information. In general, my experience has been that helps us understand priorities and business impact of some of these threats. Not all threats are created equal. Not all threats are equally important. And there's usually more threats than we can handle. So we want to know what the most important ones are. So, something I'd like to do is just kind of look underneath this and see, we're saying indicators behavior, and I'm glad we're using sticks. I think that's awesome. What information are we talking about, and where are there knowledge points that can help share that information? Because it's not only network stuff, right? We got user behavior stuff going on. We got behavioral things that are happening in firewalls and things like that. Some nice analysis that I think would help supplement what we're talking about here.
So one quick point of clarification. We're using sticks in our research at APL. I didn't want to define for the working group that they've I don't think the working group's made a decision on format yet. I didn't want to sign Ladrina up for what I was just talking about and speak for the entire group. But I would love to go that route. That is my bias.
Yeah, we'd love that too, because we're using it in some other projects at OCA. But irregardless, I think it still comes down to the data we're trying to collect, the attributes we need. I think that's fundamental, would be a good conversation, because I do know, looking across, especially today's environments where there's a lot of great analytics going on all over the place, I think there's shareable information there that's probably not being shared properly or effectively.
And to plug Kim's work, there's it's part of a series that CISA recently published. So I might throw a quick link to the main landing page where all the information is.
Well, that'd be great.
A lot of our research is about the combination of machine speed, information sharing, and security orchestration, because we really do view that we'll need to be able to tie the two together for a lot of the response side.
Can we get that link sent out by email, just for those of us that are driving? Or
you don't want to crash the car after all? Not a problem.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and don't let the title confuse you. We did this work for for some pilots for state, local, tribal, and territorial governments. But we found, as we've been sharing it on LinkedIn and a few other places on a wider audience, because I think it really applies throughout the community. There's nothing in here that's strictly for states.
Yeah, that title did throw me a bit. Yeah, I thought it was.
Yeah, I know. We mentioned that to them, but since that was the project we were under, they wanted that in the name on the website.
I do want to go back to, I believe, Russ, it was you. I've been walking in and out, so I haven't always seen commenting about, what's the context and stuff. I think the key that this working group can really try to do, and why you kind of need a working group, is with IOCs, you had a single data point and you could create a lot of inferences around it using sticks, and you could start to build if you wanted to make decisions about whether or not you should block. And it was fairly simple to figure that out. But we're talking about behaviors which by their very nature are not atomic pieces of information. It's a set of information that sort of has a relationship, a set of data with a relationship that says this data in this way is semantically this piece of information. And this piece of information has a meaning regardless of whether you're a threat analyst or a net defender or an MSSP, right? So I feel like creating sticks to do this is a freaking piece of cake. And I don't mean to use Charlie's name as a pun, but I do that often. So sorry, that was a slip. It's figuring out what are the key consistency points. So what sets of data or sticks fields are required from a consistency standpoint to create that pivoting, in essence, that Margaret sort of mentioned, right? So that you can link what's happening to how do I detect and defend it. And it has to have other context in there to make the decision about it's worth it to me to even do that, which is part of, the first half of the risk decision, right? Do I even bother with this? And the second half of the risk decision is it right for me to fix this? So I think the hardest thing that we're going to have to do, and why I think it's great this group is standing up, is figuring out those sort of sets of data that make a semantic piece of information that can be used across disciplines in this space. And that's really going to be the trick, not figuring out the sticks. Once you know what the information pieces are that are critical, I think the sticks comes fairly easy, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, and to your point, one of the capture points that I've always said is relevant that we aren't doing, we stop at EDR, but it's really mobile data, because the majority of users are most susceptible as they go in the platform of choice where it's driven most consumption and behavior, right? It's found its way trickling down or even flooding down into business models and how they consume technology is mobile. And it's largely mostly because of cost, and then to some extent because of volume of sensor data. And this could really help in terms of objects that you're suggesting, and what you talked about in terms of grouping patterns appropriately together. That could really help us figure out a way to consume that data in a meaningful way. It's operationally sustainable, right? So kudos to you.
Great. I think that I agree very much with what was said recently here, and I'm going to bounce back to some of the discussion we had at our last session. And where we ended up was really talking about defining the problem, understanding the importance, sharing those things that I think we're all on the same page on. There's might be different focuses, it might be mobile, it might be other things. But really thinking big picture rather than coming out of here in 2 months with some kind of technical implementation is a lot of the discussion that we had last time. And I want to be conscious of time and that we have about 1 minute left. I'm going to share out both this document over Slack and email to the list. But I also wanted to see, just with vacations and other things going on, if we set a meeting in 3 weeks and maybe go back to Thursdays. I don't know if that's better for folks with availability. I know we might run into some other OCA meetings. I was going to propose the same time of day for August 19th and see if that sounds like an okay date for everybody.
That works for me, Charlie.
Yeah, me too, Daryl.
Great, and I hope some of you will be getting out and unplugging, or if you are unplugging that day, well, we'll have Dee with the recording here for us to to help us out.
Same time, Ladrina?
I think so, unless there is any other OCA conflict. I'm not aware of any.
Okay, just bear with me 1 second. Let me just check on the PGB. I mean, not that that really affects us so much.
Just say a marketing meeting, but that's like a 2.
Yeah, okay, good. Thanks, Russ. You're
That's
right.
clear. That's clear.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I think that's great.
Awesome. I'm really grateful to everybody's time, and I know we're at the top, so I feel like this is a good place to end it, and looking forward to talking more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.